Well, tonight you get to find out. Joining us today is senior audio programmer at Sony PlayStation, Steve Grossman. Welcome to the show.
Hey y'all, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate you coming on tonight.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm your host, Kevin.
And I'm your co-host Brian. And I just want to highlight this fly hat I got on right here. It's from our friends at Tough Luck Apparel. You could hit them up from our show notes. And if you want to upgrade your hat game, your t-shirt game, just your game in general, go check out Tough Luck Apparel.
Awesome. You're now tuned in to Coder Conversations. Welcome to the show, Steve. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Excited to talk.
Gaming, that's one of the things that everybody loves nowadays. It wasn't always quite that way, but I think you came in the industry at a great time and you're at one of the biggest companies. So can you tell us a little bit about how you came to get employed with Sony and, maybe share some of your experiences there?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a twisty journey. It wasn't a straight line for me, but I came up in a musical family. I was, raised around musicians. My dad is a electrical engineer and musician. His mother was a classical pianist, and so I was just around music. And my dad was always building synthesizers at home, so I kind of got an early exposure to this intersection between creativity and engineering, and how both can kind of have synergy. So yeah, I got a computer science degree, and that was really from my dad's suggestion that it's hard to make it in the arts. I saw friends going that route. My sister went that route. She was an actor, and I realized that all this stuff I'm using to make music is on my computer, and I don't even really understand how it works. And so I really credit my dad. He was the one who was like, hey man, you can do both. You can be a musician, you can be creative, but you can also go in this other direction. But it wasn't,
100%. Yeah, 100%. Like that's what I'm doing with the podcast. I'm a musician, but I also do this with Kevin, and it's very fulfilling. We get to talk to awesome people like you all the time.
Yeah, totally. And I think that in art, especially, there's a certain narrative of like, you've got to sacrifice everything for art or you're not an artist. And I think that's just not true. Like there's so many people out there who are doing multiple things. There's so many artists who are, incredible business people. Like if you look at someone like Prince, like he was incredible when it came to knowing how to operate his music as a business. So anyway, in the computer science program, I was around a lot of gamers, and I grew up playing video games for sure. But I think at that time I was sort of like, man, I'm not into games the way that some of the people that I knew were, like people who could sit and play games all day. I love them, but almost like a movie, I'll play a game for a few hours and then,
you'll move on to something else.
Yeah. So for some reason at that time I went, maybe, I wouldn't be into making games, but the truth is that I actually think I like working on games more than I like playing them at a certain point, because you've got such an incredible like canvas that you can draw on with games. So anyway, I kind of transitioned out of a general programming role into the Sony role through working on the side while I had a job on building a portfolio. And I spent a lot of time reaching out to people, on LinkedIn or otherwise, going to some meetups around town that were like, indie game meetups.
That's good.
Just trying to hear from people who were doing what I wanted to do, trying to get some insight from people who were already successful. And that was the biggest thing that I needed to do. You can go online and learn anything these days, but it really helps to have guidance, because there's just so many different things that you can focus on.
To actually be able to shake someone's hand and look them in the eye and say, oh, okay, you're doing what I want to be doing, so how do I get from point A to point B?
Yeah, like you mentioned, there's tons of advice out there. So like what was valid and what was invalid, just from know, what you've heard from others in your personal experience?
That's a good question. I mean, I will say that, you know, you reach out to a certain number of people, and most people are just not through any fault of their own. They don't have time, but you get about 20% response rate if you're reaching out to people. So I will say that most of the people that responded to me had something of value to say. But the thing that was maybe the most, the people who were able to guide me in the direction that was most fruitful were the people who were able to sit down and actually talk to me for a few minutes and hear kind of a little bit of my background. And those were the people who were like, oh, you have this audio background in addition to the programming. And that was where a lot of people were like, dude, there are so many people who work in games who get kind of, they get forced into writing code for audio, but they are not audio people. And so they don't really understand the context that they're working in. They're just kind of, you know, doing their best. And so at that point, there were a couple people who were like, that's kind of a niche, and you should try to kind of focus on that, because it's the game industry doesn't have a lot of people who can do both.
Yeah, that's amazing advice.
So like, what were some of those concepts that, let's just say, somebody who don't necessarily have the audio background, what would they miss that you would pick up on?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just so I work very closely with people on our sound team, our music team, and our dialogue team. That's, you know, we're constantly collaborating on different features. And so if somebody comes to me and they say, I want to make something sound a certain way, they might not have the engineering vocabulary to say, like, this is how it needs to work. They're coming to me with the end result, like, this is the sound that I'm hearing in my head. And so, you know, a very simple example would be, you know, if your health is going down in a game, you know, a lot of the time they'll put like some kind of filter to really muffle the sound, and they'll put some kind of, you know, distortion to just make it seem like, you know, you're fading out from reality. And that is a creative need. And as someone who's, you know, worked on my own music for a long time, when they describe what they're looking for creatively, I can just like, I know that language, and I know kind of what you're speaking on, and I can fill in the engineering side. So it helps us, I think, in communicating what they're looking for.
So like, in terms of actually collaborating with the teams, you pretty much help like all of the different teams at Sony. Is that correct? Like whatever project like needs your particular expertise.
Yeah. You know, it's always a matter of shifting priorities, right? Like there are things that are most important at any given moment. And the thing about games that's interesting is every game is its own product, and
Right.
depending on the game, depending on what the player can do and what the tone of the game is, the needs for audio are can be very different. So there's obviously a lot of reuse and taking something from somewhere else and sort of trying to repurpose it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, it's a collaborative process of, we need to make something work a certain way, sound a certain way. You know, when the player does this is what we need the audio system to do. And sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's a simple, you know, thing, and sometimes we need to build like a custom system that can track a bunch of things from the game and kind of update the audio system in real time. So it just often depends on what the needs of the game are and how much time we have.
Okay. Do you remember that game Flower that came out on PlayStation?
I do.
I think it came with the PS5. I'm not sure, but I just remember feeling like it was such an immersive experience, and just very like tranquil and just super chill.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I would say that one of the things that's interesting about our group is that I think sound design and audio is one of those things that sometimes it's like subconscious. You're not totally, because games are so visual, you're really locked in to, okay, the player's moving around or whatever.
Right.
And the thing is, like, if the audio is not right, it'll take you out of that pretty quickly. Like if something is not working, if that visual feedback, if there isn't really good connection between audio and visual feedback when you do things, it can take you out. But yeah, it's cool that you noticed that, because I think a lot of the time, you know, audio is one of those things that if it's really working perfectly, you won't fully realize it's doing anything, because, you know, it kind of combines with the visuals to become a cohesive thing.
I mean, it's kind of like you think about watching a movie like Home Alone, you know, and the score, it's like gigantic score out of nowhere from John Williams.
Mm.
So, and you know, he did what he did Jurassic Park, he did Indiana Jones.
Mm. Yeah.
So, like in terms of, like you just mentioned, like if you do a good job, people don't really notice it. I think that's that organic effect. Like you're putting all of this effort to make people not notice it, versus like if you overdo it, it starts looking gaudy. So, like, what are some of the things you have to do to, you know, not go overboard, but just make sure you're staying in that organic zone?
Yeah, man, that's a really great question, because it's tricky, right? Like if something is too subtle, you won't notice it. You know, like I think that it's making me remember of this system we were building to try to have more accurate acoustics. You know, when you move in and out of spaces in a game, you know, the reverb of the room I'm in now, it's a small room. The reverb is very like short. There's not a lot of echo, but you move into a huge room, you know, you want that space. You want all of the sound you're hearing to fit the space you're in. And that's
Like you wanna feel that like expansiveness, right?
exactly right. And similarly, if you're standing behind things, obviously they get the sound that's, you know, being obstructed by whatever you're standing behind is going to start to get filtered. You know, it's just from a physics standpoint, the high frequencies are short. They can't travel very far. So if, you know, they're going to be absorbed into the thing that's in front of you. And long story short, we built this whole system and it was very accurate from a physics standpoint. Like it was very like, and it just wasn't, because, you know, it was too subtle. You know, like we tweaked all these things, we spent a bunch of time on it, and eventually we realized, you know what, we basically just need it to turn off and on. We don't need it to do this this fancy. We were kind of ramping in and out. Like the more behind something you get, the more muffled it gets. And it wasn't reading in gameplay, because, you know, in a game, you just want, you kind of it needed to be clear to the player that they were behind something, and the angle of how far behind they were really didn't matter. So that's an example of something that we kind of had to test it out a bunch to kind of take it from, okay, we took it really far in the direction of making it realistic, and that just doesn't play, and we've got to kind of roll it back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like you're talking about, like you're going for one aim, you're going for one angle, and then all of a sudden this thing kind of like jumps up at you, and it's like, oh, wait a second, maybe we need to kind of scale back or dampen this, or you know, add more reverb or lessen the reverb. Like, could be a whole host of reasons.
Yeah, it takes a lot of playing the game to get it right. I mean, humans, we operate on feel. Feel is so important, right? And we can imagine a million things, but it doesn't really matter. You've got to get the prototype out there and then just kind of iterate on it as much as you can.
I know like Sony has a wide variety of games, you know, like more realistic games, more cartoonish games, you know, Loco Roco, or going to Naughty Dog's Last of Us. Do you have to like drastically, like vastly alter the systems going between these different types of games? Like, do you have to use vastly different techniques, or is it kind of like tweaking the same base pretty much?
Yeah, it's I think surprisingly, there's a surprising amount of overlap regardless of the game style, just because from a very high level, I mean, just kind of speaking on what was interesting to me initially about games is if I give you a CD and you play that CD, you can play it for the next 100 years. It's going to play the same way every time. There'll never be a new thing that happens, right? It'll always play those songs. But games are all about dynamic. They're all, the whole sort of art form is a dynamic experience. So each time, you know, it depends on the game. Some games are more linear, but for the most part, as soon as you gain control of the character, you can decide what to do. And so the whole like foundation of game audio and the technology is what is happening in the game right now that we want to capture. So let's say we want to capture the value of the player's health, or we want to capture some aspect of the game. Are they in a stealth mode? Is stealth mode on or off? Are they indoors or outdoors? All of these different variables that are happening in the context of the game can be used to drive the audio. And that core engine of here's something from the game that is usually a number, it's usually, you know, some value. It's getting fed into a system that knows about sound, it knows about all the audio stuff, all the effects, all that. What do we want that value to do? When the value goes, you know, from 0 to 100, it's going to turn some audio thing up or down, right? And that can get super complicated about what a value does. But that's kind of the core like idea. And within that idea, we've got to move things around and we've got to make things more specific. But that core is kind of always present.
Okay. And what about AI? You know, we talk a lot on the show about AI kind of infiltrating different industries and disrupting certain industries. How are you seeing AI play out at Sony?
Yeah. You know, I think honestly, from my experience, and it's really just the games industry. It's not just Sony. And I would argue that it's pretty much the entire, you know, tech industry is kind of trying to figure out where the most payoff is, where you know, right now it's like every service that you use, they're throwing AI into it somehow. And I think this is kind of sort of like what I was saying before, where you've got to throw something in and then you've just got to test it. I feel like that's kind of where we're at with AI as a concept. We're just throwing it in everything, and we're kind of seeing where it's beneficial and where it's maybe not as beneficial. And so, to answer that question, you know, I think Sony has taken a pretty measured approach. It's not like let's just throw it at everything and turn it on in every process. They're very deliberate if they are going to use it for something, and there's a lot of, I think, conversation about how it's being used. You know, in my day-to-day work, I've used some of the like Visual Studio integrations to, you know, for a project, let's say that's using Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine's documentation is pretty bad, and it changes. It's pretty much constantly changing, and no one is updating the documentation. So
oh wow,
the only way you can really use Unreal is if you dig through their code, and it's, you know, it can take a lot of effort to say, okay, I want to do this one specific thing. This engine with like millions of lines of code, it can take you an hour or more to figure out what you need to do. So that's an area where I will say that AI has been incredibly useful. Like,
yeah,
it can point me, okay, the thing that you just described, go to these files, look at these functions. This is what you want to do. And that's like amazing, right? So that's one way. I would say in terms of like it coming up with code or coming up with sounds or any of that kind of stuff, you know, generally not as useful yet, because, you know, there is a lot of handcrafted kind of approach that goes into what we do. And so sometimes an AI can make a bunch of decisions that you kind of have to go and undo, and that can take longer than just you doing it yourself. So it depends on the problem. We're still testing it out.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much found something similar at my job. Like, it's great at telling you, okay, this is the problem, but the solution it gives you might not exactly solve the problem. And you have to go in there and make some tweaks and fix it. But it might have taken you weeks to try to isolate what that problem was in the first place. So
Yeah.
I think it's great as an assistant. It's not a programmer replacement.
Like a tool. It's great to be
Yeah.
used as a tool, not as, okay, we're going to go ahead and let Jimmy go, the junior web dev, Chat GPT can take care of all of his roles. Like, that's not really the smartest. I mean, I know companies are doing that. They are letting go of junior talent and then replacing it with AI, but I think that's going to ultimately bite them, because if there's no juniors, how do you become a senior? Right? Like, where do you get your seniors from if there's no juniors?
Yeah.
It's a strange thing.
I think that the thing that's so strange is that the AIs are the models are kind of trained to sort of have this confidence, I guess, that they're correct about what they're telling you. And if you really know what you're doing, you can spot it a lot of the time that, like, this is just wrong. Or it'll tell me, okay, this code, this is the code you need to go look at. I'll go look at it and I'll go, oh, it mixed up some words that were similar in my question, and it saw that word in the code, but these things are totally unrelated. And the problem is that if you're not as experienced and you're just trusting AI to be like, it's always right, you're gonna end up chasing your tail quite a bit, because it's very convincing even when it's wrong.
Exactly. I think what AI really does is people think it saves a lot of time. It can if it's used tastefully, but if it's just used to generate a lot of code, all it's doing is just shifting the time required to somebody having to come in and understand the code and test all the edge cases. Whereas, like, if you're writing the code, you understand it because you wrote it. Whereas, if the AI is writing it, you don't necessarily know why it did what it did.
Yeah, that's a big one. I actually met somebody recently who's like, they're working on AI models, and I'm not super I don't have a super deep understanding of how they work, but I was kind of asking him, like, is there a way to unravel its decision making? Like, if it got to this decision, why can't you give me like a log of, okay, here are all the things it decided to do, and here's kind of the context. And it's really just it's crunching on such a massive amount of data, and it's doing so many things, in parallel, that I think at this point, from what I understand, it's kind of a black box, which is bizarre. But
Yeah.
Hopefully we could get to that point, because I do think, like, if you look at something like a synthesizer, let's say, you've got a bunch of knobs, and you can reach in, you have a sound, that's a signal that's going through the synth, and you can turn knobs, and different knobs affect the sound in different ways. It would be and I know, like, AI models have weights, and you can get more, like, specific into that, but I think having more of an ability to interact with its decision making beyond just writing a text prompt, I think that's going to be a big game changer, because right now it's a little bit it's a little cumbersome, right? Like, I've gotten to the point where I had a file that was like 10,000 lines long, like a huge file, and I basically just needed to go through and add a bunch of logging, and it was very consistent. I had to do it like it would have been, a consistent pattern. And so I asked an AI to help me with that, and it was basically like messing up the file. It
Wow.
would get long story short, I realized it can't parse this file. It's 10,000 lines long. Yeah. It's getting to a certain point in the file, and then it doesn't know what to do. And so I did it myself, and it was annoying, but that was something that it wasn't, like, couldn't tell me why it wasn't working. I had to go and dig into, like, what's going on.
And that, of course, it just goes to prove why humans are still being employed in tech and in gaming. The AI, people want to hype it up like, oh, it can do everything. It could take this junior developer's job. It could do what the senior developer's doing. Okay, maybe, but maybe half the time it's getting it wrong. And then you got to play cleanup at that point. And was it really worth it? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it totally is shifting the work. Like the work isn't going anywhere. It's just there's upfront work, which is like you got to design the system. You maybe have to draw some block diagrams. You've got to figure out those things before you write code, and then you've got to do the actual work, and then you've got to test it. And right now, I think it's the illusion is that you don't have to do the first two steps. The AI just does the design and it does the implementation, and you just test it. But I will say that a lot of software engineering is designing like modules, and you design those things with the intention of connecting them together, or in the back of your head that later on I'm going to want to do these other things. And so you're able to design it in a way that leaves certain things open or possible. And AI can't really, I mean, if you're having it design pieces of systems for you, there's no guarantee that there's going to be good interconnectivity between those different pieces when it comes time to say, okay, actually, I want this to talk to this. Well, the AI didn't know that when you asked it to make this. And so how is it going to connect those two? It might have to completely redo it. So I think there's a lot of gray area that this problem gets oversimplified into like, can it write code that works or not? And in some cases, yeah, it can write code that works, but humans are messy. We change our minds. We make something and then we decide we want it to be different. And I think in reality, that's why, investing in like collaboration and being good at collaborating with people and having relationships is just something that, at the end of the day, we're making products for people. And so I think there's an innate knowledge of what it is to be human that we all take into whatever it is we're doing. And at the end of the day, like that, to me, that's the most important thing.
I think that's like a really healthy attitude, especially it seems like companies who are engineers first, they understand that because they're using it firsthand, that AI is not just this magical thing that's gonna, you just let it go and it just solves everything. Like a lot of that is like CEOs buying into marketing fluff. Like, okay, I got this automaton and it's gonna save me, hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but it's not really like that. It enables you and me to kind of do our jobs faster, just like any improved tool.
Totally. Yeah, totally. It's an interesting time. I think we're going to look back on this and realize that like we didn't really know how to use it yet. And, it's just when there's hype and especially when there's money,
like a lot of missteps. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. A lot of like fear of missing out, people who are like, I got to jump on this or else I'm not going to, I'm going to miss out.
So like have all of the, well, not all of it, but have most of the problems in audio been solved, or is there still any frontier where there's like some gray area and there's a lot of research going on, and how does that affect games?
It's a really good question. In games in general, as time goes on, we get better GPUs, we get, better CPUs, we get just better systems. We're able to get things, we're able to simulate reality more closely. And, does that make the games themselves better overall? Depends. I mean, a bad game's a bad game. Even if it's, hyper realistic, it doesn't really matter. In terms of audio, I would say that one of the areas that is kind of, well, before I say the area, let me just say the challenge in games is that you've got a real-time continuous piece of software that is updating, every frame it's updating the state of this world. So you've got things in physics that are updating, you've got, I shot a gun, the position of the bullet was here, next frame it's here, and all the enemies, where are they? But you've also got to update all the rendering, all the different, the smoke and the lighting and the, all these things have to happen pretty quickly. And audio doesn't always get a lot of processor, allocation to use. And sometimes we're not, we do a lot of optimization, especially when, we're testing games towards the end. that's very important to the player experience. That it's more important that the game works than it sounds, than it has some, you know, sophisticated audio thing in it. So it's a trade-off sometimes, but that's all to say that there are things like real-time acoustics that I was sort of talking about before, where you're in certain spaces, and there is a lot of math that can model a space. It can model, you know, you're in this space and sound, there are all these surfaces around, and when you talk or whatever, when a sound is emitted, it's bouncing around that space, and maybe this material is hard, and so when the sound hits that material, it bounces off. Maybe like my acoustic panels, it's an absorbing material, so when sound hits it, it absorbs into it. It doesn't bounce around. So that's the kind of problem that is, we can kind of solve it at a mathematical level. We can model a space and say, okay, what would that space sound like? But it's pretty resource intensive to every frame take all the sounds that are happening, compute their positions, and update the audio system to make it sound accurate. So we do things like that. Those things are happening in games, but they're not, you know, there's always a little bit of trickery. There's always a little bit of, you know, maybe painting with a broader brush, because we just don't have the luxury of simulating the entire thing all at once. So those are the kind of problems that I think are going to continue to kind of get better as the technology improves.
Okay. What about a game like, you know, a Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII? What does that look like? You know, putting together the sound profile for a game like that, is that really intensive?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very multidisciplinary process. You know, that's another thing that attracted me to games. I grew up playing music, but I also had a bunch of friends who were visual artists, and I kind of have gotten myself into animation and 3D modeling just because, you know, with games, you can't help but touch, audio can't help but touch other things. Like if you're making sound effects, you've got to go to an animator. Okay, the animation has this timing. You know, the sound effect has to accentuate the weight of the animation. It has to, they really have to work together. And, you know, there are a lot of conversations about things that sometimes are, can feel kind of esoteric, like the word tone. Like, what does that mean? Like, you know, when someone's talking about audio, they might say, can you make that sound a little more fat? Or that sounds a little bit
Thin.
And those words are sort of meaningless because your ears and your perception is different from mine. So from an audio standpoint, thin can mean turn it up. It can mean boost some of the low frequency. It can mean add saturation. It can just mean too many different things for me to take that, for anyone to take that and say, okay, I know what to do now. So I think there is a lot of what I would call interdisciplinary, like, translation that has to happen between, and there's a lot of reference, right? I mean, that's a huge part of being able to develop a visual language, a sonic language, a tonal language, is to say, here's a bunch of references of other things that are kind of in a space that we feel is similar. And, you know, it's, I think there's just a lot of collaboration and testing, because sometimes you know, you say you want something, I make it, we try it out, you go, actually, I was wrong. But you start kind of, that's why I'd say, like, in games, there are some programmer types who are very like, leave me alone, I want to go do what I want to, like, give me the problem to solve and then leave me alone. It's hard to do that with games. It's very difficult because you are constantly tweaking things with other people and trying to make them kind of feel right. And
it's like a constant collaboration, right?
Totally. Yeah.
You know, a lot of times the game industry, it can get a bad reputation, you know, from crunch time to, you know, sometimes I guess the frat culture that existed at certain companies. Like, in terms of gaming, have you experienced that, or is it's not quite as bad as they say? Like, what do you really enjoy about the industry that people might not, you know, expect?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that luckily I haven't really experienced those kinds of negative things. You know, uh, I definitely have worked with people who have experienced those things. I will say that you know, it's uh, a lot of the time what makes it challenging right now is that uh, most things are remote, and so you might just be an icon on someone's screen, right? That's what they don't know you. They don't know you don't have a relationship. They see your little icon and they just, you know, might be hitting you up constantly. And what I've found really helps to eliminate, you know, if you break down crunch, you break down stress, a lot of it is assumptions. It's people who are, you know, not communicating effectively, or you know, there's some kind of missing thing that's happening. And in the past, if that's ever started to happen for me, I try to develop a relationship with the person where there seems to be a disconnect, because a lot of the time the answer is, hey, if you know this thing like a few weeks in advance, if you can let me know when you know, rather than waiting until you need something from me, then I have time where I can slot that in. But if you wait, you know, until, oh, I need this by the end of the week, you're putting me in a position that's a lot harder for me to give you what you need. And so I think, you know, are there times where things change last minute and you have to accommodate that change? It does happen. Is it constant? No. And I think I try to make it a point, if I'm going to be working with new people, to call them and be like, hey, I'm Steve. This is what I do. If something looks weird, hit me up. Like, don't hesitate. Because I think that's where a lot of crunch happens, is people just go off into their world and they do what they do and they don't talk to anyone. And then you hit some week where there's some really big deadline, and you and that person have been like working in opposite directions and you didn't know it. So I think
Right.
that's the big one. And honestly, like I had worked in like cybersecurity and I'd done other programming jobs in the past, and I felt like there wasn't as much of a communal thing. And I think growing up in a family where the arts were around me, like I was, and my mom's from Iran, and like we just always had family in the house. That's just who I am, and I like that kind of vibe. So yeah, I think with games, um, you know, over communication really can help alleviate some of those problems, because a lot of the time the people who are expecting something from you, uh, they don't know where you're at, and you don't even know what they're expecting. And so I think that's another kind of thing. That's another aspect of the collaboration, I would say.
I mean, it sounds like you're really appreciative of the video game culture, the way that people kind of look out for each other. And like you're saying, you know, this sector works with this sector, and, you know, everything is kind of collaborative in a certain way. What would you say your favorite thing about Sony is? And, you know, specifically to Sony?
Yeah. Hmm. You know, when you're in it, it's hard. You've got to kind of take a step back from it and try to look at it objectively. You know, I would just say that the the culture is really about making great things together and giving people the um, like freedom and empowerment, like empowering people to do really great work together. And I think that there is a lot of inspiration that just comes from being around people who are excited about what they do. I think that's going, you know, back to like the people and working together. You know, I think everyone I work with is just so stoked about what we get to do. And um, you know, uh, getting to work with audio people, or storytelling, world building, you know, character development, like all of these things are like, I love talking about it, and I could probably really, you know, talk your ear off about it. But yeah, with Sony, like I think there's a really good sense of fostering certain things that are important to the process, and not like being so corporate that you kind of kill the artistry. Because I think artistry and developing ideas, there's a little bit of chaos that has to exist. There's a little bit of experimentation. There has to be that sandbox that you can go mess around in before you can clean it up and make it into something that's like digestible. And they do a good job. You know what I mean? They do a good job of keeping those sandboxes kind of not stomping on those sandcastles, I'll say, and letting them exist so that people can kind of have that freedom.
So, like, who are some of your heroes in the industry, and have you been able to meet some of these industry titans? Let's just say, like a Hideo Kojima.
Oh man, I haven't met him personally, but I've been around him a little bit. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that that I think have really inspired me in gaming, they are all over the map. The dude who made Stardew Valley, which is not a AAA game, Eric Baroni, I think is his name. His username is Concerned Ape. That's what I know him as. But anyway, I mean, he's a guy who sat down and spent 4 years grinding like 12-hour days. You know what I mean? He made all the art, all the animation, all the sound, all the music, all the coding, he did everything himself. And he made an incredibly great experience that people love. And he was very, he served the fans even after the game was out, constantly updating things and adding things. And, for me, I guess I view a lot of the things I do as they're all kind of one big continuum, in my personal life, producing music and working on, my creative projects. That has been influenced a lot by gaming. And so, the kind of people who are able to create a very singular experience, like Silent Hill is another franchise where I'm like, it's such a singular
so good
atmosphere. Like you go into that world and it's like nothing else feels like this atmosphere. It feels so unique. So those are those kind of things are really what I feel drawn towards, is something that just feels like it's got its own personality.
What do you think about like Borderlands 2?
Yeah, I love the stylized kind of graphics. I mean,
it's kind of different. So it's a little different than most of the stuff that's been coming out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's hard to be different because it's risk, and it's like there's just no way to you can do focus groups and you can test certain things out, but what I was saying before with things feeling right, that sort of intuition that humans have when what was that Sonic movie when the first version of the Sonic character, the 3D modeled one where it just looked really weird. I mean, a bunch of people worked on that, and that got signed off as that's what we're going to do. I mean, the backlash that people had was immediate. People were like, this is horrible. So it's tough to know that some unique idea is going to work for the audience. I think the tricky thing is when you're working on stuff, you get so close to it. You know what I mean? You get it becomes so familiar to you that it's very hard to see it with a fresh perspective.
Yeah, that Sonic movie, that had to have been one of the biggest turnarounds in movie history, because it was looking like a bomb, and I'm impressed how much they were able to just turn it into a movie kids actually liked. So, what are some of your more, just from you personally playing games, what are some of the more iconic moments of sound that, stand out to you? Like for me, for example, maybe the fire in Dark Souls, when you're by the fireplace, you hear crackling, or the footsteps in Resident Evil. What are some of those standout moments to you?
Oh man, those are some good examples.
Especially Resident Evil. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the thing about like, dude, a horror game or like any game like that, take the sound out, it doesn't work. Like audio is an incredible part, especially silence, like taking a bunch of sound away for a period of time, and your brain is like anticipating what's coming around the corner or what's in the darkness. Yeah, I would say maybe, I mean, for some reason, certain sounds that are like associated with safe places in games, like save music or checkpoints or stuff like that. Like there's man, what is that indie game called? Hollow Knight. You know, there's like a little loop that plays when you sit on the bench, which is like where you kind of can save the game. And you know, there's I think a lot of my examples are so hyper specific, but there's a level in one of the Ratchet and Clank games from oh man, I can't remember the level, but it's a rainy level, and yeah, just the atmosphere of the rain and the music, and I don't know, you know, that it's that strange sense of being immersed. You're convinced, right? I mean, it's that sense that the you feel like you're in another place. And yeah, that's one that I remember as a young kid, like really almost feeling like that was a real place, and that I really wanted to go there.
Yeah, I think, you know, I teach drums, and I teach feel and groove, which to me, that's one and the same. But, you know, like you're talking about, there's something that's intuitive. There's something that's, you know, maybe under like an undercurrent, something that's like below what's visible, like an iceberg. Um, and so I teach that because I feel like if you can feel, you know, the beat to Billie Jean, if you could really feel that, then you're probably pretty good. You know, if you could play along to Resolution from A Love Supreme, John Coltrane, you're probably pretty good. So at some point I realized, okay, it's the records. Playing along to the records is sort of like playing along to being live with other musicians. And this jazz saxophonist told me this one day. I met him randomly in LA. I was just out on the street playing music. And he said, you know, what I do lately is I just play the Coltrane records. I play the Miles Davis records. And he said, you know, I feel like if I could hang with the record, I could probably hang with the musician. And that made a huge impact on me because before that point, I was learning mostly out of books. And at that point, I realized, oh, wow, like there's this whole other world outside of sight reading that the schools don't really show you.
Yeah.
So in that way, I'm glad I didn't go to school for music because I feel like they would have ruined me and like, you know, put me off into like a certain corridor.
Yeah. It's reminding me of another, I think it's Coltrane, who there's another kind of principle of absorbing ideas that he would, instead of like, let's say there's 10 songs you want to play and you practice one for an hour, he would take one song and just sit on it for like 4 or 5 hours, the same thing. And he would just, you know, like it would sink into your bones after a while that, you know, you're absorbing. And I think that that's the thing about a lot of what we experience. It is subconscious to us. We're not totally aware of it, especially when it's good, you know, like that flow state that we all are probably chasing most of the time is something that, you know, your mind can kind of get in the way of that because it wants to control things. It wants to understand something before you've done it. And I think that's why sometimes when you're being creative, that's kind of going back to the sandbox thing I was talking about, like having that place where you can just try whatever you want, and you can be wrong, you can make things that are bad, you can do some crazy stuff. You know, there's a lot of, you know, amazing stuff that can come out of that process when you're not afraid of trying things, and when you just kind of allow your intuition to guide you rather than having everything having to be intellectual.
Let me ask you this. So, okay, you deal with sound. Do you also on the side write video game music, compose it?
I have. before I got this gig, I wrote a whole pirate music soundtrack, which was crazy because I would never do, like, that's something I would never decide to do on my own. Unfortunately, the people who I wrote it for never released the game, and they still have, like, it's still under contract that I can't. I mean, not that I'm trying to drop an album of pirate music or anything, but that was a cool experience. I got to do something that I would probably never have done on my own. I definitely write a lot of music, and most of the time I either know I'm going to play it with my band, or I'm going to play it with my solo project, or I goes into this bin of just like, I don't know, this is just some idea that I had. And I would love to do more composing for games, but the honest truth is it's a highly saturated market. And lately, especially because of AI and all that, lately I've been investing in the live music area, because that's just something that people are wanting, and you can't really spoof that.
Yeah, like for me, I've made a lot of video game music on the the Korg Electribe, the EMX1, that blue device.
Yep.
It's like rectangular. So I've made a bunch of video game soundtracks, but have never been able to actually break into the industry, them actually using the music that I've come up with. And I feel like I've got some pretty creative OSTs, but I've just never, I don't know, I've never made the right connection to push one of these projects into the mainstream, into a AAA game, or whatever else the case might be.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because even big games, like, they don't have like an in-house composer, let's say, who's like, okay, this is the person at Sony who composes music. Every project will have like a very specific idea of what they want, and they'll just hire that person, on some contract. Okay, write 2 hours, 3 hours of music or whatever it is, and they'll give them maybe like a high level spec of like, here's the tone of the game, here are some of the levels, here are some of the things. But the interesting thing about that is, you're getting like a huge amount of music, but it's never playing back in game exactly the way it was written. It gets cut up into a million pieces, and it gets kind of almost arranged. It gets the game design of music can also be very dynamic. So you might have different stems. Here's like the string stem, and here's the stem for the timpani, and the composer might deliver that in a certain way, and it might get chopped up and rearranged and to fit the gameplay better. So some composers are okay with that. Some people are like, hey, you just like mutilated my my music. And it's kind of a strange, I mean, it depends too. Like, there are smaller companies where the composer is way more it's way more direct from composer to in game.
But like you said, I think it's highly saturated. There's a lot of, games in general. People want to work, just flat out. People want to work in the game industry. It's, lucrative. It's something that people have, maybe, they're 5, 6 years old. They're telling their mommy, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to work on video games. And, most of those people never will. But someone like you, you've had the focus, you've had the resilience, the willpower to push through, and you've really made an interesting career for yourself.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I will just say, like, it really wasn't a straight line. There were a lot of interviews and things that didn't work out. That I didn't just say I'm gonna go for audio programming. I did a bunch of I submitted a bunch of composer, like, I forget what they're called, but like a pack of a bunch of stuff, like a portfolio. I did a bunch of sound design tests. I really tried to paint with a broad brush and see what I could do. And yeah, I think what really helped me was to build a portfolio that was diverse and you know, that's the part that was a sacrifice. You know what I mean? Like I was working full time and then I was grinding after work to build out another completely different skill set. You know, I didn't have like a game design specialty in college, so I didn't have those skills out of college. And so there was a lot of learning and doing projects on my own that started to move me in a direction of actually being able to, you know, be useful to a company that is looking for a certain kind of thing. And I think what helped me, as much as I think it's important to find a niche, it's also important that because I was speaking on how much you have to work with other people, you have to be good at your job, but you absolutely have to understand the kind of the holistic view of what everyone else has to do, because you'll have to work with other people, and you don't have to do their job, but you have to know what their job is well enough to be.
I think a lot of people miss that. I think that's a point that's kind of overlooked. But like you're saying, there's so much collaboration between the sound design, the game design, the art, the 3D modeling, you know, everything is interacting with each other. And if you can't look across the aisle and say, okay, hey, Chris, you know, I just did this way. Does that work? And it's like, oh yeah, definitely. That works. You know, that collaboration is probably huge in what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, you can't expect to have your little, like, I think it's also another aspect of that I'm realizing is flexibility too. Like this is very common with artists, but like being very precious about how something, like an idea, like I really wanting it to be a certain way. And, you know, at the end of the day, you have to, there's no world where you make games where there isn't throwaway work. It's just impossible. You have to get through certain ideas to get to the one that's like the best version of it. And there are some people I've worked with, this has been more the case on the engineering side, where they just get very attached to, you know, I want to use this latest framework. I want to use this cool new technology, and I want to do it this way because in my mind, this is the best way to do it. And I have seen so many times that the best way to do it is to use, you know, the dumb way, the simple way. And some people really like, it irritates them to have to do things kind of imperfectly. And I'll tell you right now, every game you've ever played is very imperfect. You know, like it astounds me how chaotic things can be right up until the point when it's done. And, you know, I think that's just the difference between like working in your bedroom or working in academia versus working on the real world. Like, you know, it's messy.
Yeah. I mean, for my final question, I guess I like to ask people this sometimes on the show, is like, okay, if you could go into a time machine and go back to when you're like, you know, right entering high school, like 14, 15, what would that future self tell that then 14, 15-year-old self to look out for? You know, watch out for this guy, watch out for this girl. You know, what would you actually say to yourself?
You know, I think at the time I was real invested in music, and especially like performing, and I think that has both my engineering and my music have kind of, they strengthen each other in ways that I don't even probably realize, but I'm glad I have both. But at the time, I was, you know, I was around a lot of visual artists. I was around a lot of painters, animators, and for whatever reason, being a musician, you kind of around other artists. And I always assumed like, I can't do that. I grew up in a musical family. I can't do that other stuff. It took me a long time. Working in games was something that opened this up to me, to realize that storytelling, whether it's visually, whether it's through the written word or through music, it's all kind of a big continuum. It's all kind of the same. We're all communicating the same emotions and ideas.
Right.
And, you know, in the last couple of years, I've been, you know, getting into making music videos and building my own kind of 3D worlds and telling visual stories in addition to music and sort of my understanding of technology being kind of the glue. And when I was younger, I kind of just assumed like I have to commit to one thing and do that one thing and get really good at it. And there's truth to that. But at that time, I wish I would have felt more free to just like go for all the crazy ideas that I had, because it took some time for me to allow myself to do that.
I mean, like in my own like music career, I wish that at like 14, 15, I started playing drums at 14, but I wish I had also picked up piano and heavily gone into sight reading and, you know, classical jazz, all that stuff. Because I can just see how much it would have helped me to have learned that skill set. You know, I bought a keyboard a couple of years ago. I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn all the, you know, seventh chords and all this jazz theory. And a couple weeks in, I'm like, this is way too hard. I could just sit down and play this on the drums like nothing, but on the keyboard, I can't do it. And so that's kind of, you know, looking back, yeah, I wish I spent a little more time on the keyboard, piano. But you know, that's always like hindsight. You know, in hindsight, it's so easy to say, oh, I should have done X, Y, and Z at this point in time. But you can't, you're too close to that normally. You're too close to the situation to say, you know what, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. You're just kind of going to go with the flow and try to figure out what, you know, what feels the best to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that my take on things nowadays is like, because it's been a real challenge in my life to balance my career. It can be pretty. There are days where I feel like my brain is just completely empty after work. To balance that with like wanting to have a fruitful, you know, creative life and release albums and go play music, sometimes balancing those two things can be tricky. But what I've found is, you know, we're constantly rediscovering and redefining ourselves. Identity is kind of an illusion. You know, we can be whatever we want to be if we decide that we want to do, you know, new things. And I think there are a lot of like people who kind of are gatekeepers. Like, you don't get to call yourself this until you hit some arbitrary, you know, point, but it's just not real. And, you know, I think that's where like getting out there into the world and meeting other people who are stoked on whatever it is you want to do. Like, man, there isn't anything that's more like having that support system is so much more powerful than just being like, I'm going to grit my teeth every day and rely on willpower. Cause, you know, I think we're tribal and we're meant to have those sort of tribal systems of other human beings to complain to and talk to and stuff. So, yeah.
Hey, man, it was an absolutely amazing interview at the top of the hour. Before we get out of here, did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would say that if anyone out there is wanting to get into games or wanting to do anything really, you know, I would allow yourself to explore what it is you want to do without the fear or pressure of it happening or imagining, you know, what might go right or what might go wrong. Reach out to people, man. People are nicer than you think. I promise. The people who will respond to you are generally going to be good people because they went out of their way to respond to a stranger. And so that's a big one. Like, don't be scared to reach out and test the kindness of a stranger. Ask them for advice. Hit me up. I'm around. You know, if anyone wants feedback or wants to talk about anything, I'm totally down, because I wouldn't be where I am right now if other people didn't do that for me.
Absolutely. Where's the best place for our audience to find you at?
If you want to talk, you know, career stuff, probably LinkedIn. If you want to talk, you know, or if you're a musician or an artist or a creative person, I've got an Instagram. The artist name that I go by is Puzzle Mirror. So you can find me at Puzzle Mirror on Instagram. I'm about to drop a song and a music video in the next month. And this year I'm dropping a full length album that's been like, you know, a year and a half in the making. I wrote it, I mixed it, I mastered it, you know, performed it. So if you're interested in any of that, you can check out Puzzle Mirror.
Amazing. And we'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time.